big change in the middle of the 6th century when one man seizes control of the government as what the Greeks called a tyrant.
The story of how this tyrant or sole ruler came to power has been preserved by the historian Herodotus. One day, a man of dignified and noble bearing rode into the city of Athens. Beside him stood a tall and beautiful woman. A woman he claimed was the patron goddess of Athens, Athena. This dashing figure demanded that he be given the rule of Athens, for like one of Homer's heroes, he had the protection of a goddess. Surprisingly, he was welcomed by the Athenians as their new ruler, despite the fact that the goddess was simply a particularly tall girl from a neighboring village. And the heroic figure was an ordinary man called ΠΕΙΣΙΣΤΡΑΤΟS, Cleisthenes' own brother-in-law.
ΠΕΙΣΙΣΤΡΑΤΟS was, I think, an excellent politician. He was a man, without doubt, with an eye for the main chance.
But as he consolidated his rule, it became clear that ΠΕΙΣΙΣΤΡΑΤΟS had far greater ambitions than simply gaining power.
Pisistratus was an extremely intelligent man. He clearly understood that if he was going to maintain control of Athens, if he was going to be able to consolidate his rule and pass it on to his sons, which is clearly his ambition, he would have to find allies.
Pisistratus took an extraordinary step. He turned to the common Athenians for support, undermining the whole hierarchy of aristocrats and commoners that had endured for centuries. Pisistratus reduced taxes and introduced free loans to allow the people to build up their farms. And by offering the Athenians the chance of prosperity, Pisistratus began to transform his city.
With the rise of Pisistratus, we start to see the success of agrarianism accelerated at Athens. And that's going to be a kernel that's going to grow and grow and grow in the ensuing 2 centuries. And one of the results of that is we see more vines and olives. Olive trees manifest themselves in every aspect of Greek culture. Economically, they allow people to have cooking oil, they allow people to eat olives, they allow people to use lubricants, soap, fuel, so it's a very valuable economic commodity.
The land around Athens produced excellent olives, the best in the Greek world. And as production soared, the Athenians found a ready market for this oil. Not only in the other Greek states, but across the sea, in Egypt and Phoenicia, Persia and Assyria. For Athens was ideally situated to export to the entire eastern Mediterranean.
Greece is in the middle of an extraordinary grouping of ancient civilizations. It's bounded on the east by the great Persian Empire, on the south by the age-old civilization of Egypt, on the west the Etruscans and the Romans. Greeks were scattered. Plato has a rather nice phrase, like ants or frogs round a pond.
The eastern Mediterranean was the greatest marketplace of the ancient world. It seemed that everyone had something to sell. Grain from Scythia, salt fish from the Black Sea, wine from the great vineyards of the island of Chios, gold, silver, art and finery from Egypt. And everyone was willing to trade for Athenian olive oil. As goods flowed in and out of the Athenian harbor, the Athenians found their wealth and prosperity on the rise. But the most astonishing consequence of Athens' sudden expansion was to be found in the darkest streets of the city. Athens' first great artistic legacy, the vase.
And I think what's fascinating about the pottery is that in its own time, it wasn't a big deal artistically. What was inside the pots was almost invariably worth more than the pot itself.
Pottery had been a staple across the ancient world for hundreds of years, used in the kitchen at home and for transporting oils and food.
It's now become almost commonplace for a Greek vase on the modern antiquities market to fetch millions of dollars or pounds. And if the makers of those vases had any idea of what we were shelling out for them, their graves would spin with either resentment or just absolute hilarity.
These Athenian potters seem to have been motivated not by the idea of producing great art for eternity, but of outdoing each other. On one particularly fine vase, we find the proud comment,
"Euthymides, son of Polias, drew this."
And then underneath,
"And I'll bet Euphronius couldn't have managed it."
For the first time in their history, the ordinary Athenians had tasted freedom. And they had shown their capacity for extraordinary achievement. Cleisthenes grew to manhood under Pi-Sistratus' rule. And he saw how Athens changed. His home had turned from a modest rural settlement into an international economic power. But Pi-Sistratus' rule of benevolent tyranny was not to last forever. In the year 527 BC, he died and was laid to rest here in the Athenian graveyard. His son Hippias took over. At first, Hippias followed in his father's footsteps, ruling Athens with a fair hand. But soon, the Athenians discovered the perilous nature of tyranny. Historians tell us that in the year 514 BC, Hippias' brother was murdered. Aggrieved and bitter, the tyrant's behavior completely changed. Hippias not only executed the murderers, but cruelly tortured one of their wives to death as well. Aristotle described the ruler's slide towards madness.
After this, the tyranny became much harsher, for Hippias ordered numerous executions and sentences of exile in revenge for his brother.